She was left for dead in the desert, until a silent cowboy chose to stand beside her. The Girl in the Dust. Nevada Territory, 1878. The desert did not forgive weakness. It stretched wide and merciless beneath a burning sky, swallowing sound, swallowing footprints, swallowing the desperate cries of those who had no one left to hear them. Elias Callahan had ridden those lands most of his life. He knew the way the wind changed before a storm. He knew the scent of rain that never quite reached the ground. He knew the difference between a coyote's cry and a man pretending to be one. And that evening, as the sun sank red against the horizon, he saw something that did not belong. A horse without a rider. The animal staggered across the trail ahead of him, reins dragging, sides lathered in sweat. Its saddle was torn. One stirrup hung loose. Elias narrowed his eyes. "Easy there," he murmured, guiding his own horse forward. The stray horse stopped 20 yards away and let out a low, trembling breath. Then Elias saw it, a shape in the dust. At first, he thought it was just a coat tossed aside. But coats don't bleed. He swung down from his saddle before his mind could tell him not to get involved. The figure lying on the ground was a woman. Her dress was torn, her face bruised. Dark strands of hair clung to her blood-streaked cheek. One hand was curled against her ribs as if even unconscious, she was trying to protect herself. Elias knelt beside her. "Miss," he said quietly. No answer. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. There were tracks in the sand, several horses. A struggle. Drag marks. Someone had meant to leave her there. Dead. Elias exhaled slowly. He had promised himself long ago he would not interfere in other people's battles. The West was full of broken stories, and a man could drown trying to fix them all. But when the wind shifted, he heard something faint. A whisper. "Don't." Her lips barely moved. That was enough. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, careful as if lifting something made of glass. She winced even in unconsciousness. "All right," he muttered. "You're not dying here." He lifted her onto his horse, securing her gently in front of him. She was lighter than she should have been. Too fragile. As he turned toward his ranch 20 miles west, he noticed something else. On her finger was a gold ring, not simple. Engraved. Expensive. This was no drifter. And whoever had hurt her would likely come looking to make sure the job was finished. Elias adjusted his hat and urged the horse forward. "Let them come," he said quietly. The desert swallowed his words. The ranch at Red Hollow. Red Hollow was not much to look at. A modest ranch house, a weathered barn, a windmill that creaked in the breeze. But it was safe. Elias had built it far from town for a reason. He carried the woman inside and laid her gently on his bed. Under the lantern light, her injuries looked worse. Bruised ribs, split lip, deep gash along her temple, rope burns around her wrists. His jaw tightened. He cleaned the wounds carefully, speaking in a low voice though she could not hear him. "Whoever did this," he muttered, "was either a coward, or afraid of you." Hours passed. Near midnight, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, gray, sharp even through pain. She panicked instantly, trying to sit up. "Easy," Elias said calmly, stepping back so she could see him clearly. "You're safe." Her breathing quickened. "Where?" she whispered. "My ranch. Red Hollow." She looked around, disoriented. Then memory rushed back. He saw it happen, the terror. "No," she breathed. "He'll come back." "Not tonight," Elias replied evenly. "And not without going through me." She studied him then. Tall, broad-shouldered, sun-worn face, eyes that had seen too much but said too little. "Why?" she asked weakly. Why help me? He considered the question. Because you were still breathing. Something in her expression shifted. Confusion, disbelief, maybe the smallest flicker of relief. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, as if names were dangerous things. Clara Whitmore, she finally said. Elias stiffened almost imperceptibly. Whitmore. There was only one Whitmore family powerful enough in this territory to matter. Judge Henry Whitmore. Railroad money. Political pull. Ruthless reputation. Elias. Voice stayed neutral. Judge Whitmore, your kin. Her jaw tightened. My husband. Silence fell heavy in the room. Elias stepped back slightly. Your husband did this. Her eyes filled. Not with tears. With shame. He said I embarrassed him, she whispered. I spoke against one of his land seizures. In public. Elias. Expression hardened. And for that, he tried to kill you. She swallowed. He doesn't like being defied. A muscle ticked in Elias' jaw. He'd heard stories about Judge Whitmore. Men losing land overnight. Families disappearing. No one ever proved anything. Until now. Clara tried to sit straighter, wincing in pain. I need to leave, she said urgently. If he finds me here, he'll destroy you. Elias met her gaze steadily. Ma'am, with all due respect, I've survived worse than a judge with fancy boots. You don't understand, she insisted. He owns half the territory. Then he can afford to lose one fight. For the first time, something like a faint smile touched her lips. It faded quickly. He won't stop. Good, Elias replied quietly. Neither will I. A past he doesn't speak of. Over the next 3 days, Clara drifted in and out of sleep. Elias kept watch. He cooked simple meals, fed the horses, repaired the fence line, but he never rode far. Not now. On the 4th morning, Clara managed to walk to the porch. The desert wind lifted her hair as she gripped the railing. It's quiet, she murmured. It usually is, Elias replied, standing nearby but not too close. She looked smaller in daylight. Fragile, but not weak. You live alone? She asked. Yes. No family. He shook his head. Lost them years back. She didn't press. But she sensed it, the grief he carried like a second shadow. What happened? She asked softly. He stared at the horizon for a long time. Same thing that happens when powerful men decide they want what isn't theirs. Her eyes flickered. Whitmore. He gave no answer. That was answer enough. Something passed between them then, an understanding that needed no words. They had both stood on opposite sides of the same monster. The riders on the ridge. On the 7th day, Elias saw dust rising in the distance. 3 riders. Not ranchers. 2 coordinated. Clara saw his expression change. He found me, she whispered. Elias walked inside calmly and retrieved his rifle. You stay in the house. No, she said firmly, surprising him. I won't hide again. He looked at her. Truly looked. The bruises had faded slightly, but fire had returned to her eyes. You can barely stand, he said. I can stand enough. The riders approached the gate. One called out, Judge Whitmore is looking for his wife. Elias stepped forward. She ain't here. The man smirked. Mind if we check? Yes. The smile vanished. This isn't a request. Elias cocked the rifle. It just became one. Tension thickened the air. Clara stepped onto the porch behind him. I'm not going back, she called out, her voice shaking but clear. Tell my husband I choose exile over his name. The riders exchanged glances. You don't get to choose, one snapped. Clara lifted her chin. I just did. Elias didn't lower the rifle. After a long moment, the riders turned their horses. This isn't over, one warned. Elias' voice was steady. No, it's just starting. As they disappeared into the horizon, Clara swayed slightly. Elias caught her before she fell. You all right? She nodded weakly. They'll tell him. Good. She looked at him, confused. Why good? He met her gaze. Because now he knows you're not alone. For the first time since he found her in the dust, Clara felt something stronger than fear. Hope. The man who would not kneel. The riders returned to Virginia City before nightfall. Judge Henry Whitmore listened without interruption. He stood beside the wide window of his study, overlooking the growing railroad town that bore his influence like a brand. Smoke curled from chimneys. Lamps flickered along Main Street. Everything he saw, he believed he owned. She stood on the porch, one of the riders reported. Told us she wasn't coming back. Whitmore's fingers tightened around the crystal glass in his hand. And the man, tall, rancher type, armed, calm. Whitmore's jaw shifted. Did he give a name? No, sir. Whitmore set the glass down slowly. Find it. Red hollow. The calm before. Clara could feel it. The stillness wasn't peace. It was waiting. Elias repaired the corral fence that morning, movement steady, unhurried. But his mind was calculating distances, to town, to the ridge, to the nearest cover. You should leave, Clara said from the porch. He didn't look up. I built this place with my own hands. He'll burn it down. Then I'll rebuild it. She walked closer, favoring her ribs less now. Strength was returning to her limbs, and with it, the weight of reality. He doesn't lose, she said quietly. Elias finally met her gaze. Everyone loses. Not him. A long silence passed. You're wrong, Elias said at last. He lost something already. She frowned slightly. What? You. The words hit her harder than any blow Whitmore had ever given. For years, she had been told she was property. Decoration. A tool for alliances and appearances. No one had ever spoken of her as something that could be lost. Her voice softened. You don't know what that costs. I do. The truth beneath the dust. That night, Clara sat at the wooden table while Elias cleaned his rifle. Why does he hate you? She asked. Elias paused. He doesn't know me. That's not what I meant. The lantern flickered between them. You said powerful men once took something from you. He set the rifle down carefully. 3 years ago, Whitmore bought land north of here. Good ranch land. Families had been there for decades. Clara's stomach tightened. He said it was for the railroad expansion, she whispered. It wasn't, Elias replied. It was leverage. He stood, walking toward the window. One of those families was mine. The words were flat, but heavy. My father refused to sell. Said land wasn't paper to be traded. Clara's breath slowed. What happened? Elias didn't turn around. A fire. Her hand moved to her mouth. They called it an accident. She already knew the truth. My father didn't make it out, Elias continued. Neither did my younger brother. The desert wind pressed against the walls. And you think Whitmore ordered it? I know he did. Clara's eyes filled with quiet horror. I never knew, she whispered. No, Elias said gently. You weren't meant to. Silence wrapped around them. She stood slowly and stepped closer. I stood beside him at dinners, she said shakily. Listened to him speak of progress and expansion. You were surviving, Elias said. She looked up at him. I was complicit. No, he said firmly. You were trapped. Their eyes held. For the first time, their connection wasn't built on rescue. It was built on shared loss. Whitmore strikes back. 2 days later, smoke rose from the eastern ridge. Elias saw it first. His jaw tightened. That's Miller's place, he muttered. Clara stepped beside him. Your neighbor? Yes. Without another word, Elias saddled his horse. I'm coming, Clara said. No, I won't sit and wait while more lives burn because of me. He hesitated, then nodded once. They rode hard. By the time they reached Miller's ranch, flames had already devoured half the barn. The Millers stood helpless, watching their livelihood turn to ash. Elias dismounted immediately, helping drag water barrels. Clara moved without hesitation, pulling Mrs. Miller and her children away from the smoke. Who did this? Elias demanded. Old man Miller spat into the dirt. Men asking about you. Clara's chest tightened. This is my fault. Elias shook his head. No, this is his. The fire crackled violently, and across the ridge, 3 riders watched. A message delivered. That evening, Elias found a note nailed to his barn door. The handwriting was elegant, cold. Return what belongs to me, or I will take everything that does. Clara read it in silence. He won't stop, she whispered. No, Elias agreed. Fear flickered in her eyes. For the first time in my life, I want to fight. Elias studied her carefully. Fighting Whitmore isn't just courage. It's sacrifice. I've already sacrificed my dignity, my safety, my name. She looked up at him, steady. I won't sacrifice my soul. Something shifted in Elias then. Respect. You sure about this? He asked quietly. Yes. He folded the note. Then we don't just defend. Her pulse quickened. What do? We expose him. Clara's breath caught. You think the town will listen? If the truth comes from you, they might. She looked toward the dark horizon. The man she had once stood beside now hunted her. The man she had once feared now stood beside her. I won't run, she said. Elias nodded once. Good. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was coming, not just from the sky. The town that watched. The morning Clara decided to return to Virginia City, the sky was iron gray. Storm clouds rolled low over the desert, pressing down like judgment. Elias tightened the saddle straps in silence. You don't have to do this today, he said quietly. If I wait, Clara replied, steadying her breath, I'll lose my nerve. He studied her. The bruises had faded to faint shadows. The fear in her eyes had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer fear of being hurt. It was fear of staying silent. You speak, Elias said. I'll stand behind you. She gave him the smallest nod. That was enough. Virginia City. When they rode into town together, conversation stopped. Virginia City had always been loud. Wagons rolling over wooden planks, miners shouting over whiskey glasses, railroad men arguing over maps. Now, silence followed them like a shadow. Clara felt every stare. Whispers spread quickly. That's the judge's wife. I heard she ran off. Look at her. She's riding with Callahan. Elias' name carried its own weight here. He was respected, quiet, dangerous when pushed, and Whitmore knew it. They dismounted in front of the courthouse, the very building where Judge Henry Whitmore had sentenced men, seized land, and shaped the future of the territory to suit himself. Clara's hands trembled slightly. Elias noticed. He stepped closer, his voice low. You're not alone. She lifted her chin. Then she walked inside. The confrontation. Judge Whitmore stood at the front of the courtroom, speaking with 2 railroad officials. He saw her immediately. His expression did not change. But his eyes darkened. The room fell silent. Clara, he said smoothly, as though greeting her after an afternoon stroll. How relieved I am to see you safe. Safe. The word felt poisonous. I wasn't safe, she replied clearly. A ripple moved through the room. Whitmore's smile thinned. "You've been misled," he said gently. "You suffered a fall from your horse. You were confused." Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. "No," she said firmly. "I was beaten." Gasps broke through the crowd. Whitmore turned his gaze slowly toward Elias. "And this man filled your head with that story?" Elias did not move. Clara stepped forward. "He didn't have to. I remember every strike." The judge's voice hardened by a fraction. "You are my wife. You will not disgrace me publicly. I am not your property." The words echoed. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You're unwell," he said coldly. "You require rest. I require justice." A murmur of agreement rose from somewhere in the back. Whitmore's eyes scanned the room. He saw it. Doubt. And he hated it. "You dare accuse me without proof?" he asked, voice sharp as glass. Clara's voice did not waver. "My bruises were proof. The rope burns were proof. The men you sent after me were proof." Every eye turned toward Whitmore. The judge's mask began to crack. "Sheriff," he said evenly, "remove this man." The sheriff hesitated. "Sir, on what charge?" Whitmore's gaze was ice. "Kidnapping my wife." Gasps filled the room again. Clara stepped in front of Elias. "He rescued me." Whitmore's voice thundered. "He abducted you." The sheriff looked trapped between power and truth. Elias spoke for the first time. "If I abducted her," he said calmly, "why would she ride back here by choice?" Silence. Whitmore's hands clenched behind his back. He had ruled this town through fear for years. But fear required obedience. And obedience was slipping. The arrest. Whitmore made a decision. "If there is to be a spectacle," he said coolly, "then we will have one." He turned to the sheriff. "Arrest him for trespassing on my property and assaulting my men." "That's a lie," Clara shouted. Whitmore's eyes never left Elias. The sheriff swallowed hard. "Elias Callahan," he said reluctantly, "you are under arrest." Clara grabbed Elias' arm. "You can't let them." He looked down at her, calm. "It's all right." "No, it's not." His voice softened. "If I resist, he wins." She felt tears burn her eyes, not from weakness. From fury. As they led Elias away in shackles, Whitmore leaned closer to Clara. "You should have stayed quiet," he whispered. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "You should have treated me like a human being." For the first time in years, Whitmore looked uncertain. Because the room was watching. And they were not looking at him the same way anymore. The jail cell was small and cold. Elias sat on the wooden bench, hands resting calmly on his knees. The deputy closed the door with a heavy clang. "You shouldn't have crossed him," the deputy muttered. Elias gave a faint half-smile. "He crossed me first." Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Rain began to fall. Clara's choice. Clara stood alone in the center of the courthouse after everyone had gone. She could leave. She could disappear into another territory. Start over. Be safe. But safe had once meant silence. And silence had nearly killed her. She walked slowly to the sheriff's office door. "I want to file a formal accusation," she said clearly. The sheriff blinked. "Against who?" She held his gaze. "Judge Henry Whitmore." The words felt like lighting a match near dry wood. The sheriff hesitated. "You understand what that means?" "Yes. It will divide this town." "It already has." He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a blank document. "Start talking." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something stronger began. Truth. Fire in the night. The rain did not last long. Storms in Nevada rarely did. By midnight, the sky had cleared, but the air felt heavier than before. Clara sat alone at the small desk in the sheriff's office, finishing her written statement by lantern light. Every word felt like carving truth into stone. He struck me. He ordered men to pursue me. He burned the Callahan land 3 years ago. The last sentence had made her pause. "You're sure about that?" the sheriff had asked earlier. She had looked him directly in the eyes. Yes. The sheriff knew what that accusation meant. Not just domestic violence. Not just abuse of power. Murder. When she finished signing her name, her hand trembled slightly. Not from fear. From the weight of it. The cell. Elias sat quietly in the dark jail cell. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Not the deputies. These were heavier. Deliberate. Judge Whitmore stopped outside the bars. The lantern light caught the polished shine of his boots. "You look comfortable," Whitmore said coolly. Elias didn't rise. "I've slept in worse places." Whitmore's lips curved faintly. "You should have stayed out of this." Elias lifted his gaze slowly. "You should have left her alone." For a brief moment, Whitmore's calm slipped. "You think you've won something?" the judge said sharply. "A few whispers in town. A written accusation, I think," Elias replied evenly. "You're afraid." Silence. Whitmore stepped closer to the bars. "I built this town," he hissed. "I control the law, the land, the railroad. One rancher with a grudge does not threaten me." Elias stood now, moving close enough that only iron separated them. "Then why are you here?" The question lingered. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You've already lost," he said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." He turned and walked away. But Elias noticed something. Whitmore hadn't sounded confident. He'd sounded desperate. A town divided. By morning, Virginia City buzzed with rumor. Some said Clara had lost her mind. Some said Whitmore had finally gone too far. The Millers spoke openly about the fire. 2 former railroad workers claimed they had been forced to sign away land under threat. Fear still hung in the air. But fear was no longer one-sided. Clara stood outside the general store when Mrs. Miller approached her. "You're brave," the older woman said softly. Clara shook her head. "I'm terrified." Mrs. Miller gave a sad smile. "That's what brave feels like." Across the street, Whitmore watched from his office window. And he saw something that chilled him. People were talking. Not to him. About him. The breaking point. That night, Whitmore made his decision. If power could not silence them quietly, it would silence them loudly. 3 masked riders moved toward the jail under cover of darkness. Their orders were simple. Make it look like escape. Make it look like violence. Make sure Elias Callahan never speaks again. Inside the cell, Elias heard the first sound, the faint scrape of boots outside the rear entrance. He stood slowly. The deputy on night duty lay unconscious against the wall. The lock began to rattle. Elias' pulse stayed steady. He had expected this. The door burst open. A masked man stepped inside, revolver drawn. "Time to run," the man sneered. "Or die trying." Elias lunged before the sentence finished. The gun fired, the shot deafening in the small room. The bullet grazed Elias' shoulder, but he didn't stop. He slammed the man against the bars, wrenching the weapon away. Another attacker rushed in. Fists, metal, blood. The cell erupted into chaos. Outside, Clara heard the gunshot. Her heart stopped. Without thinking, she ran. Fire and truth. When Clara reached the jail, smoke poured from the back entrance. "They've set it on fire," someone shouted. Flames licked up the wooden frame, swallowing the dry timber quickly. Inside, Elias fought off the second attacker, shoving him into the wall. The third man hesitated, then fled. Cowardice often arrived at the first sign of resistance. Elias staggered, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The smoke thickened. The fire spread fast. Outside, townsfolk gathered, uncertain, frightened. Clara pushed forward. He's still inside. The sheriff shouted for water buckets. But Clara didn't wait. She grabbed a soaked cloth, wrapped it around her mouth, and ran into the burning building. Clara! No! Someone yelled. She ignored them. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating. Elias! She shouted. A beam collapsed nearby, sparks flying. Through the smoke, she saw him, struggling to stand. She reached him just as he faltered. You stubborn man, she coughed. He managed a faint, pained smile. You came. Of course I did. Together, they staggered toward the exit as flames roared behind them. At the last second, part of the ceiling gave way, crashing down where Elias had been moments before. They burst into the night air, collapsing onto the dirt. The crowd erupted. Shock, relief, anger. And across the street, Judge Whitmore watched the failed attempt. His plan had backfired, because now it wasn't whispers. It was outrage. No more shadows. The sheriff stepped forward, face pale. This wasn't an accident, he said loudly. Everyone knew what he meant. Clara rose slowly, helping Elias sit upright. Blood stained his shirt. You need a doctor, she said urgently. I've had worse, he muttered. But his eyes stayed locked on Whitmore. And Whitmore realized something terrifying. The rancher had survived the fire. And now the town had seen it. Seen who ran into the flames. Seen who stood across the street and did nothing. Fear was shifting. It no longer belonged to Clara. Or Elias. It belonged to the judge. The line in the sand. The next morning, the courthouse steps filled with townsfolk. Not summoned. Gathered. Clara stood beside Elias, whose shoulder had been bandaged. The sheriff addressed the crowd. There will be a formal investigation into last night's events. Whitmore stepped forward, trying to reclaim authority. This is hysteria, he declared. You let emotion cloud judgment. No, Clara interrupted firmly. We let truth open our eyes. Murmurs of agreement followed. Elias stepped beside her. You wanted me silent, he said evenly to Whitmore. You should have made sure I didn't walk out. Whitmore's face went pale with fury. This isn't over, he snapped. Clara's voice was steady. No, it's not. But this time, the town wasn't silent. And for the first time in years, Judge Henry Whitmore stood alone. The trial of power. The courthouse had never been this full. Men who once tipped their hats to Judge Henry Whitmore now stood stiff-backed along the walls. Women who had whispered behind curtains now sat in the front row, unblinking. Railroad workers, ranchers, store owners. Virginia City had come to witness something it had never dared before. Judgment. Elias stood beside Clara at the plaintiff's table. His shoulder was still bandaged, but he refused to sit. Across the room, Whitmore adjusted his cuffs with measured calm. If he felt cornered, he did not show it. Power had been his armor for too long. Opening fire. The territorial magistrate from Carson City had been brought in to avoid claims of bias. An older man, stern, not easily impressed. This court will hear accusations of attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, and assault, the magistrate announced. The words rang heavy. Clara's hands trembled slightly under the table. Elias leaned closer. You steady, she inhaled slowly. Yes. But inside, her heart pounded. Because this was no longer about survival. It was about exposure. Clara speaks. When Clara was called to testify, the courtroom held its breath. She walked to the stand without looking at Whitmore. State your name, the magistrate said. Clara Whitmore. A flicker of reaction passed across the room at the surname. You accuse your husband of assault and attempted murder? Yes. Her voice did not waver. She described the night in detail. The argument. The public humiliation he claimed she caused. The rage in his eyes. The first strike. The rope. The order to finish it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whitmore's attorney stood. Is it not true, he began smoothly, that you have been emotionally unstable for some time? Clara's eyes sharpened. No. Is it not true that you fell from your horse and imagined? I remember his voice, she cut in firmly. I remember the smell of his cologne when he leaned down and told them to leave me. Silence. That is not imagination. The attorney shifted. You are aware that accusing a sitting judge of murder carries consequences. Clara's gaze lifted slightly. I am aware staying silent carries more. Even the magistrate paused at that. The witness that changed everything. The courtroom doors creaked open unexpectedly. All heads turned. An older man stepped inside slowly, hat in hand, clothes worn from ranch work. Elias stiffened. Mr. Callahan, the magistrate said, this is irregular. I have testimony, the man said quietly. It was Thomas Green, a former foreman who had once worked for Whitmore's land acquisitions. Whitmore's expression tightened. I was ordered, Green said, voice shaking, to set fire to the Callahan ranch 3 years ago. A wave of shock tore through the room. Whitmore rose instantly. This is absurd. Green continued. I refused, but another man took the job. We were told it would resolve resistance. The magistrate leaned forward. You are stating under oath that Judge Whitmore ordered arson? Yes, sir. Whitmore's attorney objected wildly, but the damage had landed. Elias, jaw tightened, memories flooding back. His father's shout, the smoke, the flames devouring everything. Clara reached for his hand under the table. He did not pull away. Betrayal. Just when it seemed momentum had turned, the doors opened again. This time, it was someone Clara never expected. Her older brother, Samuel Whitmore. He had stayed distant for years, aligning himself with their father's political ambitions. Samuel, Clara whispered. He avoided her eyes. I testify, he said carefully, that my sister has long harbored resentment toward her husband's work. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Samuel continued. She often threatened to ruin him publicly. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Whitmore sat back slightly, sensing opportunity. Clara stood abruptly. That is not why I stand here, she said, voice cracking for the first time. Samuel's jaw clenched. You don't understand the forces at play, Clara. No, she said softly. You don't. The betrayal cut deeper than any bruise. Because it wasn't born of cruelty. It was born of fear. Samuel was protecting power, not truth. Elias takes the stand. When Elias was called, the room quieted again. He walked to the stand slowly. Did you kidnap Mrs. Whitmore? The attorney asked sharply. No. Did you assault Judge Whitmore's men? They came to kill me. The attorney scoffed. Convenient. Elias leaned forward slightly. You want convenient, he said calmly. Convenient is a fire that starts the same night land papers are refused. The magistrate raised a hand for order. Mr. Callahan, answer directly. Elias. Eyes shifted to Whitmore. I found Clara in the desert. Half dead. That's the only reason she's alive to speak today. The room absorbed that truth in silence. And if I had to do it again, he added evenly, I would. The cracks appear. The trial stretched for hours. Witness after witness. Stories of intimidation, forced signatures, burned barns, threats whispered behind closed doors. Whitmore's confidence began to erode. Not because of one accusation, but because of many. Fear had once isolated victims. Now it united them. As the magistrate called for recess, Whitmore stood slowly. He locked eyes with Clara. "You've destroyed your name," he said quietly. She met his stare without blinking. "No," she replied, "I reclaimed it." The verdict looms. Outside, the town waited. Inside, the magistrate reviewed testimony with grave expression. By sunset, word would spread one way or another. Clara stepped outside for air. Elias followed. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her eyes shimmered. "My brother," she whispered. "Fear makes men small," Elias said. She looked at him. "And what makes them brave?" He held her gaze. "Someone worth standing for." For a moment, the chaos faded. The fire, the courtroom, the betrayal. It was just two people standing in the open air, choosing each other against a world that had tried to break them. Inside, a bell rang. The verdict was ready. Make sure to like and subscribe for more story backquotes like this.